The vote count appeared on the Senate screen at 11:47 p.m., December 26, 2024. 46 in favor, 25 against, 1 abstention. For the first time since taking office over a year ago, Javier Milei had gotten a budget through Congress. In the viewing gallery, his sister Karina Milei allowed herself a rare smile. Below, on the Senate floor, Economy Minister Luis Caputo was already on his phone, texting the news to international investors who had been waiting anxiously. This wasn't just a budget. It was proof that the madman could actually govern. To understand why this moment matters, you need to know that Argentina hasn't had a properly approved budget in 3 years. The 2023 budget was the last one to pass Congress. Since then, the country has been running on extensions, rollovers, and executive creativity. It's like trying to drive a car while constantly hot-wiring it because you lost the keys. When Milei took office in December 2023, he inherited this budgetary chaos. His first move, he didn't even try to pass a 2024 budget. He simply extended the 2023 one. Then he did the same for 2025. Critics called it autocratic. He called it efficient. Why waste time negotiating with parasites, he had said. But 2026 would be different. It had to be. The October 2024 midterm elections had changed everything. Milei's party, La Libertad Avanza, had shocked everyone by becoming the largest bloc in the lower house. They went from being a minor irritant to the dominant force. In politics, momentum is everything, and Milei had it. 3 weeks before the Senate vote, Milei called his inner circle together. The meeting included his sister Karina, Economy Minister Caputo, and his strategic advisor Santiago Caputo, no relation to the minister, despite the shared surname. The question on the table was simple. Do we go for broke with a radical budget, or do we compromise to ensure passage? If we compromise, Milei said, according to someone in the room, we're just another government. If we stay radical and lose, at least we lose with honor. Santiago Caputo disagreed. Honor doesn't pay IMF loans. We need this budget to pass. The budget they crafted was a masterpiece of political engineering. On paper, it projected 5% growth. Optimistic, but not insane. Inflation at 10.1%, ambitious but achievable. A primary surplus of 1.2% of GDP, maintaining Milei's obsession with fiscal discipline. But hidden in the details were provisions that would fundamentally reshape Argentina. Authorization to issue foreign debt without coming back to Congress each time. Massive infrastructure spending cuts offset by promises of private investment. And most controversially, the framework for potential dollarization, though this was buried so deep in the technical appendices that most senators wouldn't even notice. The real challenge wasn't the content, it was the math. Milei's party had only 19 senators out of 72. To pass anything, he needed at least 37 votes. That meant convincing 18 senators from other parties to support him. In Argentine politics, this usually requires either bribes, threats, or promises. Milei chose a fourth option, exhaustion. For 2 weeks before the vote, Milei met with senators individually. Not to negotiate, he famously refuses to negotiate, but to lecture them. Senator after senator reported the same experience. Milei would talk for 2 hours straight about Austrian economics, the failures of Keynesianism, and why fiscal deficits were literally evil. By the end, they were so exhausted They would agree to anything just to make it stop. Former President Mauricio Macri watched this spectacle with growing anger. His PRO party controlled 7 Senate seats, crucial votes that Milei needed. But Milei had recently snubbed Macri by refusing to give PRO a seat on the powerful Auditor General Board. It was a calculated insult. Milei was saying, "I need your votes, but I don't need you." The week before the vote, Macri made his move. He called his senators to a meeting at his apartment in Puerto Madero. The message was clear: make Milei sweat. Don't commit to voting yes until the last possible moment. Make him beg. But Milei doesn't beg. Instead, he went nuclear. On December 23rd, 3 days before the vote, Milei gave an interview to La Nación newspaper. When asked about PRO's hesitation, he said, "Mauricio Macri can either be part of Argentina's transformation, or he can be remembered as the president who failed and then blocked the president who succeeded. His choice." The personal attack on Macri was breathtaking in its audacity. You don't publicly humiliate someone whose votes you need. Unless you're Javier Milei, unless you've calculated that Macri's senators care more about being on the winning side than about defending their boss's honor. December 26th, the day of the vote. The Senate chamber was packed. This wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This was Milei's first real test of whether he could transform his electoral victory into legislative power. The session began at 2 p.m. Senator after senator rose to speak. The Peronists attacked the budget as cruel and anti-worker. One senator called it a death sentence for the provinces. Another said it was economic terrorism disguised as fiscal responsibility. Milei watched from his office in the Casa Rosada, occasionally laughing at the more dramatic speeches. "Economic terrorism," he repeated to his aides. "They're describing their own policies for the last 70 years. The PRO senators kept everyone guessing. As each one spoke, they criticized aspects of the budget, but wouldn't say how they would vote. It was political theater at its finest, or most irritating, depending on your perspective. At 8 p.m., Macri finally gave the signal. His senators would vote yes, but they wanted their objections noted for the record. They were supporting the budget despite Milei, not because of him. It was a face-saving measure that fooled no one. The real surprise came from an unexpected source. 3 radical civic union senators who were supposed to vote against instead abstained. When asked why, one reportedly said, "I'm tired of voting against everything just because it's Milei. The country needs a budget." As the vote was called, Luis Caputo did something unusual for an economy minister. He prayed, not metaphorically, literally. He closed his eyes and moved his lips in silent prayer. A photographer caught the moment. The image would later become iconic. The atheist president's Catholic minister praying for a libertarian budget to pass a Peronist-dominated Senate. When the final tally appeared, 46 to 25, the government benches erupted, but Milei, watching from his office, simply nodded. No celebration, no victory speech, just a nod. Then he turned to his sister and said, "Now the real work begins." The opposition's response was predictable, but revealing. Christina Kirchner posted on X, "They passed a budget that will starve the provinces to feed the IMF. History will judge them." But even her attack seemed half-hearted. She knew what everyone knew. Milei had won more than a budget. He had won legitimacy. The international reaction was immediate and positive. The IMF released a statement within hours praising Argentina's commitment to fiscal sustainability. The risk country index dropped 50 points overnight. Argentine bonds rallied. The peso, perpetually weak, actually strengthened slightly. But here's what most analysis missed. The budget itself was less important than what it represented. For the first time in decades, an Argentine president had presented a genuinely balanced budget and gotten it through Congress without massive payoffs or backroom deals. Yes, there had been political maneuvering. Yes, there had been compromises buried in the fine print. But compared to the corruption and vote buying that usually accompanies budget negotiations in Argentina, this was remarkably clean. The provinces especially were unhappy. The budget maintained Milei's cuts to federal transfers. Governors who had hoped a congressional budget would restore their funding were disappointed. The governor of Buenos Aires province, Axel Kicillof, called it a declaration of war on federalism. Milei's response was characteristic. Federalism doesn't mean the federal government pays for provincial corruption. If governors want more money, they should cut spending like I did. The budget also included something that went largely unnoticed, but may prove most significant: authorization for the executive to restructure or eliminate up to 200 government agencies without congressional approval. Hidden in Article 47, subsection C, was language that essentially gave Milei the power to continue his chainsaw approach to government for another year. When opposition senators realized this days later, they were furious. "We were tricked," one said, but it was too late. The budget was law. Luis Caputo, in a rare moment of candor, later admitted that passing the budget had required creative interpretation of Senate rules. Certain amendments that should have been voted on separately were bundled together. Debate time was mysteriously cut short due to technical difficulties with the chamber's clock. "We played by Argentine rules," Caputo said, "which means we made up the rules as we went along, just like everyone else has for 70 years. The difference is our rules lead to fiscal surplus, not deficit." The business community's reaction was enthusiastic but cautious. The head of the Argentine Industrial Union said, "A budget is good. A realistic budget is better. We'll see which one this is." International investors were less equivocal. Within 48 hours of the budget passing, 3 major investment banks upgraded their outlook on Argentine debt. Goldman Sachs wrote, "For the first time in a generation, Argentina has a government that can pass economically rational legislation. This changes everything." But does it? The budget still needs to be implemented. Projecting 5% growth is one thing. Achieving it is another. Keeping inflation at 10.1% when it's currently running at over 30% annually requires either economic genius or economic fantasy. Milei seems unbothered by doubts. In his first public appearance after the budget victory at a small business forum, he said, "They said I couldn't govern without a budget. Now I have one. They said Congress would never support me. Now they do. They say the targets are impossible. Watch me make them possible." The truth is, this budget is less an economic document than a political weapon. It gives Milei the tools to continue his transformation of Argentina without having to constantly return to Congress for permission. It's a blank check written in the language of fiscal responsibility. Today, as 2024 ends, Argentina has something it hasn't had in years. A real budget passed by a real Congress for a real government with a real plan. Whether that plan is genius or insanity remains to be seen. But for one night in December, in a Senate chamber that has seen so much dysfunction, something functional happened. A budget passed, democracy worked, and Javier Milei, the man everyone said couldn't govern, proved that he could, at least for one night.